What event in your life effed you up mentally, for the rest of your life? I came home one day. Mind you, my mother had been abusive to me my whole life. She had a Grundig stereo, and was playing Irish music very loud. After I called out a few times pretty loudly, no one answered, so I picked up the needle which scratched the record, and she came out of her bedroom with my dad's gun and shot at me twice. I was 13 at the time, and never went back home. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Where did you go after that? What happened to your mom? Jail? I'm so sorry, parents can be real a-holes. Wow, I didn't realize so many people would care. I appreciate you, and everybody else, that's for sure. I'm old now. This happened in 1973, people didn't get punished back then, the way that they do now, for this kind of thing. I lived on the streets for about a year. Winters were very hard, it gets below freezing a lot in El Paso at night, and it does snow there. I had an old army jacket, and I would shoplift at the local 7-Eleven for food. Sometimes friends would invite me over, but I never could get a shower, and pretty soon, no one would have anything to do with me. My dad was in Vietnam at the time, and my mother for some reason resented me. I had 3 older sisters, and they were never punished for anything. Funny thing is, when I was in my early 30s, raising 3 kids of my own, social services in New Mexico tracked me down, and told me my mother had dementia, and that I needed to be her power of attorney. When I asked why my sisters, who I haven't had contact with either, refused to help her, they told the caseworker that my mother had abused him so bad, that they never wanted anything to do with her again. Which was a total lie. So, I ended up being her power of attorney, had to go and see her to get her into a state mental hospital. She thought I was her husband, who had abandoned her, and tried to strike me the first time I saw her again. It's a weird world out there. I've had serious trouble trusting anybody or anything, and quite frankly, I was happy for a few years raising my kids and they're very successful. But I'm kind of done. I just don't want to do this anymore. It's amazing how hard the thoughts can come back sometimes. I know I never reached the potential of being the man I wanted to be, and I feel a little sad for the guy in me that didn't make it. Somebody did die that day. Sorry for being so long-winded, it's just not easy to say it all in a couple of lines. It wasn't even that long ago. My dad was always the idyllic standard of a strong person. At 6 feet 5 inches and around 240 pounds, he was hard to miss. But he was kind, charitable, memorable, and often unflappable. Even after the 1-in-a-million cancer diagnosis, he continued to be the same old guy. In between hospital visits with mesh screens for MRIs and bouts of radiation, he never seemed to weaken. My parents had moved away from me and my hometown years before, so I didn't get to see Dad too often. The last time he came to my coast, I finally started to see the cracks forming. He couldn't walk very well, and had bathroom issues. He was always way too free about telling me things like that. Classic Dad. The last time I saw him was back on his coast. I was able to have the joy of telling him that my now husband and I were engaged. But during that trip I saw one of my heroes look truly weak. He insisted on trying to stand and walk as much as possible, despite his prognosis and weakened state. One day, several of us in the room helped him to stand, and he immediately fell backwards, and said, "I'm dying." It truly broke my effing heart, and still does to this day. Seeing someone you love and admire come to grips with mortality is almost indescribable. Dad's been gone for just over 3 years now, but that is a moment that I wish I could scrub from my mind. My whole childhood was an event that effed me up mentally for the rest of my life, but when I was 8, my little brother hung himself with his long sleeve on our bunk bed, and I walked in, while he was purple and limp, with his eyes rolled back. I screamed, and my mom got him down barely in time. I remember the paramedics holding me, and calling me an angel, as I was shaking so bad and crying. That's the only day I have a clear picture of every single detail. Few years later, at 16, we got adopted by separate families, and he hung himself in his closet, and this time, no one saved him. That was 10 years ago, and every single day, I honestly feel a part of me is dead, and I never been the same since the first time. I can't look at ropes, or people hanging in movies, or people talking about stuff like that, or suffocation, or anything related. Severe like PTSD from when I was 8, and the news at 16. I have so much anger, no one saved him, and so much anger we were separated, and I couldn't save him again. When I was in grade 11, it was the last day of school before summer, and I had some extra time, so I went to the nearby mall with some friends. On the way back, I just stepped onto the sidewalk after crossing the street, when I heard a blood-curdling scream, right behind me. I turned to see a woman had been run over by a flatbed truck, and was between the front and rear tires under the drive shaft. She was still alive, and calling for help. Blood leaked out of her, and there was a visible tire tread mark over her midback, which was squished flat as a pancake. She quickly faded, and stopped moving, or calling out, just before the paramedics arrived. It was around then, that I realized, had I been at that crosswalk 5 seconds later, it'd have been run over too. It was a surreal moment going back to school. I didn't know where else to go, I was in shock, and just kinda wandered there, as it was a block away. Everyone else is cheering for the end of the school year, and I'm just white as a ghost, wandering around aimlessly in total shock, probably had the 1,000-yard stare going, too. I will say, it for sure made me pay great attention, when I cross any road. It has saved my life, from stupid or crazy drivers, more than a few times, so, I guess, I thank that poor lady for that intuition, or instinct, or whatever you wanna call it. But I'm pretty sure, I have some PTSD over that event. I can see it very clearly in my mind when recalling this, right down to the wavy tread pattern on her back. I will never forget that day. I'm not superstitious, but it was a Friday the 13th, for whatever it's worth. Watching my wife, after giving birth to our stillborn daughter, try to wake her up, by rubbing her cheek and hands, scream, crying for hours for her, to just wake up. "You're young, you can try again," probably the worst words, said to us, afterwards. A year and some later, a happy healthy rainbow baby. But yeah, that effed me up good for a while, and makes being the best parent I can be, that much more rewarding. Edit. Thank you everyone for the upvotes and comments. I am truly sorry for everyone else, that shared with the loss of a little, and appreciate the openness. This can be a very hard subject for a lot of people. Just know, you don't have to grieve alone, or in silence, and it's okay to grieve, and remember how you see fit. Almost 16 years ago, my stepmother had her second set of twins. We found out at 20 weeks, that one of my sisters stopped developing properly. She had a DNR before she was born. We were lucky to have her with us for 20 months. A few days after she passed away, we went to the funeral home to discuss the service. The body had been prepared and dressed already. My stepmother had brought some of her favorite toys to put in what looked like an oversized bassinet. One thing, my stepmother has been a pediatric nurse in NICU for 20 years at that point. She has seen the worst of what can go wrong with tiny humans. She is tougher than nails. But, when she saw my sister's body in the bassinet, she reached out, and said, "Hey darlin'." Then I heard her scream. She dropped to the floor, and wailed, "She's cold. No, she's cold." I've talked to her a little about it since then. For her, she was already dealing with the medical, legal, and financial aspects of the death. We all knew it was coming. But the feeling of finality, and that my sister wasn't coming back, it hit her right then. I will never forget her scream. I will never forget how cold Isla was. Heard the impact of someone falling to their death. Can never unhear that noise, and whenever I hear something similar, I jump slightly. Had a similar thing happen, a few years back. I was driving down the highway, and saw somebody jump from the top of a highway overpass, through my rear view. Feel so bad for people, when they get to such a low point, that ending, it seems like their only option. My mom had gotten married to her fourth husband, by the time I was 11. All pretty crummy. They had some rough fights, where my mom would yell at me, to call the cops. My stepdad would always say, "If you call the cops, I'm going to make going to jail worth it." It never stopped her from yelling, "Call the cops," but my sibling and I, never did, because they were both vicious, when it came to fighting, so, we were certain, we would end up in the system after they both went to jail. After about 6 years of these fights, I wake up one morning to the usual struggle, with glass breaking and screaming, but then I noticed it wasn't my mom screaming, "Call the cops," it was my stepdad. The neighbors heard his screams and they called. He ended up leaving that day, with a police escort to the hospital. He has a metal plate in his face. They're still married over 10 years later, and after years of therapy, you would never know, that they ever did such awful things to each other. But sometimes, I look at him, and that day plays in my head over and over. They really love each other, and I don't think she meant to hurt him so badly, but it's crazy what we went through, and what it had to take to get them to seek help. It's crazy, what my brain tried to convince me was normal, and not abuse. Sexually trafficked, by my 11 years older half-brother and his friends, passed around, like a party bottom, or top, or fluffer, between the ages of 2 and 6. Every sexual act, or perversion, that could be done to a toddler kid, was done to me, by adult men and teens. No memories of life before 10, just nightmares. When I finally entered puberty, and got the video and talk and sex described to me, my brain released all the memories in sharp detail. Multiple attempts to kill myself, between the ages of 5. Where I remember standing at the top of the stairs, when my brother was calling me to come down, so he could abuse me, and my baby brain was like, if I throw myself down the stairs, maybe I won't have to do those things her makes me do. And then from 11 to adulthood, present-day intrusive thoughts, ideation, attempts. I told my mom, when I was a sophomore in college, at the urging of a roommate. She called me a liar. I moved abroad to finish school. He admitted to the rapes, when I confronted him when I was 27, after having not seen him, since I was 17. Mom said, she went to him, and he swore up and down, it never happened. I cut off contact with her, told my other brother what had happened, and explained, that's why I haven't visited more than 4 times in 40 years. It's hard not having a family. Everyone who was part of my family, thanks to Mom, thinks I'm mentally unstable. Doing CPR on a Cambodian soldier, when my interpreter tells me, the soldier's brother, who's behind me, with an AK-47, said that if I don't save his brother's life, he will shoot me. I could feel the muzzle of his rifle bumping into the back of my head, each time I did chest compressions. That kind of effed me up. CPR has such a low success rate. Statistically, the guy you were performing CPR on most likely just never came back. Yet you're here, posting the comment, thus not shot in the head, so, now I'm curious, how the rest of the story played out. Sorry, I will give you a bit more context to the story. I was an army medic, deployed to Cambodia, as part of a peacekeeping operation in 1993. The Cambodian soldier had been shot through the head and leg, after a dispute with one of his officers, and was in a pretty bad way, and I knew that the likelihood of him surviving was probably next to zero. But I had to at least try, as his family were present. It was common for families of soldiers to live with them in their compounds, so I did the best that I could to stem the bleeding, but really wasn't having any effect, and he had already lost a lot of blood anyway. The wound to his head was quite significant, and it wasn't long before he arrested, hence why I started CPR. I tried to keep it up for as long as I could. I didn't want to get shot, but eventually, I was totally exhausted and couldn't keep going. I stopped, put up my hands, and thought, that's it, I'm stuffed. To my surprise and relief, the soldier's brother just patted me on the shoulder and was crying. I think he was just trying to make sure I would really try my best for his brother. So, yeah, here I am, I didn't get shot. Back in January, my girlfriend had an aortic dissection while we were having sex, and needed emergency life-saving surgery. 6 stents and a bypass. Her aorta artery literally collapsed, and she was losing blood flow to her brain, kidneys, and legs. The ER doctor told me that she would have died if I hadn't taken her to the hospital when I did. She was only 26 when it happened, which is insanely young. Doctors kept asking me if she did cocaine, because this only happens to young people who OD, but I said we only had a couple drinks, and were having sex. They told me it wasn't my fault, and it was going to happen regardless. We later found out she has a genetic disorder that causes thin and fragile veins. Combined with her high stress, she was constantly at risk of this happening. It was the worst night and day of my life. Seeing my love, my high school sweetheart, laying in a hospital bed, crying, and saying, I'm not ready to leave you. It broke my heart. I'll spare the details of transferring hospitals, and waiting around for the surgery. After a week of recovering in the hospital, she got to go home. She had her family and best friend, who flew out to help take care of her. My dad came back and stayed to visit her, and coincidentally, had an episode the first week she got home, and was rushed to the ER. He had a hernia that was about to rupture. This had happened before, and the doctors encouraged him to lose weight before the surgery, to prevent the risk of going septic. This time, though, they said it was urgent, and they should probably operate. My dad refused, and insisted on returning to work, and was convinced he would shave off a couple pounds. I was so frustrated. All while this is happening, my grandmother, who I grew up with, and I am very close to, was not doing good, and my mom, who lives with her, on the other side of the country, had been encouraging me to visit, because she doesn't know how long she has left. What the F else, right? I juggled being with my girlfriend, who was staying at her parents', and then my dad, before he left back to work out of state, but my girlfriend's family and best friend gave me so much flack when I wasn't with her constantly. It was intensely stressful, trying to balance everything. I was with her when I could be. I changed bandages, I comforted her in really difficult nights. It was a rough recovery for her. 2 months after the surgery, when she seemed to be stable, I decided it was time to visit my grandmother. My girlfriend couldn't really travel from Georgia to California, due to appointments, and just needing to be close to her doctors. She gave me so much shit for leaving her. I was torn. I just wanted to go to my childhood home, and see my grandmother, and now my girlfriend is acting like I'm betraying her. She had been so cold to me on the phone, the entire 2 weeks I was gone. Then I came back, and everything went back to seemingly normal. I thought about leaving her, because I just feel like I am maxed out. I know she went through a lot, but I felt like she wasn't understanding that I was also going through it. We talked it out, and have been alright since. She is healthy, and progressively getting back on track now. It's a process. I am so incredibly grateful that she is strong, and has worked through so much pain, emotionally and physically. Also, my dad is fine now. He eventually got the surgery, urgently, a month later, after a similar episode. Grandma is also still hanging in there. I have been in a pit of depression since, though, even when everything seems fine now. I can't think straight, and I feel guilty when I don't spend every minute with my girlfriend. I just don't feel good about much anymore. I've lost drive in my passions. And I get so anxious during sex with her. I can't even masturbate anymore, without feeling uneasy and distracted. I had secretly bought Blue Chews, boner pills, and she found out, without telling me, and thought I was cheating on her. It eventually came up, and I embarrassingly had to tell her how depressed and recently dysfunctional I was, but until then, she treated me without trust, and it broke me down. Again, we talked it out, and now we're fine and reassured. I just feel like she has always had trust issues, and it really puts me on edge now. It's hard to snap out of a 12-year relationship, no matter how unfairly treated I feel. She is seriously my other half. Everything is seemingly alright now though. I just feel like nothing feels real anymore. My life has changed so drastically this year, and I can't snap out of it. I don't feel present. I used to love being around anyone and everyone, but now I feel like a buzzkill deep down. Just a domino of depressing events. I have never let loose about all of this to anyone, but my mom, besides the boner pill dilemma. I often dream of running away, and being a beach bum, or something. Thanks to whoever read this messy rant. Being a nurse, during the pandemic, in NYC. Shit was so crazy, that every time I told others, I didn't feel they understood the magnitude of the situation. I also didn't see my folks for 3 months. Family members couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones, because no one could enter the hospital. Some people were fine, and just dropped within hours. RIP to all those who lost their lives. I have a friend who is a nurse. Their hospital was low on PPE during the pandemic, and weren't allowed to use any masks, unless the person had actually tested positive, even if all the symptoms matched. Even if they were intubating the patient. But you know who did get PPE, even when they weren't around patients? All the administration. Work stress induced burnout. My first job out of university, I was the wonder kid. Took it all on, and did it all well. Worked ridiculous hours to impress higher-ups. Ended up depressed, suicidal, and unemployable alcoholic. Will never fully recover. Unfortunately, the psychological damage is done. Long story short, military training, 60 to 80 kilometers long march in the mountain, dumb wannabe survivalist instructor, make us ration water, me and my buddy got dehydration, 3 organ damaged, peeing blood, hallucinating, almost dead, or be a cripple, and my buddy that I thought was sleeping next to me, while I was dying, apparently wasn't sleeping, he was dead. That is indeed traumatizing. Did that instructor get any punishment later in life? As far as I know, none of them got punished, it's just an unforeseen accident. Literally only allowing us to drink 2 Vipul's bottle caps of water for every 5 to 7 kilometers, while the heat that day was very high. They probably got some good connection. Alright, let's effing get the ball rolling here. First bit, was probably having a physically abusive dad. One of my earliest memories of him, was him holding me upside down by the ankle, and smacking the shit out of me. He was super loving otherwise, to be honest, but has extreme PTSD, as well as anger and control issues. As a kid, didn't realize cowering in the corner, as your dad rained punches down in you, because you didn't sweep right, wasn't normal. Mother was extremely manipulative, and had zero emotions. Besides anger, I've never seen her cry, or genuinely laugh. Left home at 18, and 2 years later, one of my best friends from high school died in an active shooting, and I found out, by scrolling through the article at work, and seeing his face pop up. Kinda effed my head up, finding out that way, to be honest. Had a best friend who was super dope at first, but was interested in me and made several passes. I shot her down. So, one night, she starts feeding me drinks, while we're out with friends, until I'm blackout. Brings me back to my room, and while I wasn't upset about it at the time, I never would have done that sober and she knows it. Met a girl, beautiful kind, but had some pretty bad mental issues, spent 4+ years together, got a place, got married, had 2 dogs and a cat. I'll come back round to her. Then I deployed for 9 months, first to Jordan, and then to Syria, after I asked to move to a more forward base. Everything goes well for the first few months, but then we start getting suicide drones when things beat up between Hamas and Israel. Watch unconscious friends getting dragged into shelters, bleeding out their neck, thinking they were dead, or about to be so. Thankfully, they all ended up alright in the end. But we continue getting attacked for the next several months, and the sound of a lawnmower, electric bike, or especially personal drones people use, set me on edge, real effing bad. Then in January, the base I was previously at in Jordan, gets hit with drones, and 3 soldiers die. Not only did I know 2 of them, but I moved out of the room that got hit. Feels super effing weird that a text asking to be moved to somewhere more dangerous, likely saved my life, but then also doomed someone else, by freeing up the room they moved into. I know it ain't my fault, but I feel partially responsible, if I'm being honest. Now after 9 months deployed, we start the 2-week process, moving home. And my wife goes to a bar, gets drunk, and ignores me for 3 days straight. I'm freaking out a lil, as we've been having issues with her lying to me, as well as acting kinda single the whole time I was gone. We agree to break up. Next day I'd tell her, I wanted to make it work, and she wants nothing to do with it. I get back 2 weeks later and we just share a hug. Now she wants to get back together. So, I say, let's talk. Turns out, she started effing dudes, less than 24 hours after we agreed to split. So, I say, I love you, I forgive you, but no I can't. She freaks out, yells and screams at me for being judgmental and whatnot. We spend the next month living together in our apartment in separate rooms. I spend almost every moment in my room in bed, depressed as shit. She constantly comes in, and tries to pick fights about anything and everything. Then one night, she follows me around the apartment, as I try to get away from her for over 2 hours, screaming, I have a mental breakdown, and I'm just sobbing hysterically. So, what does she do but film it, and show her friends, who call me a loser, and not a real man. During my mental breakdown, I try to leave the apartment, and she threatens to call the cops, and lie to them, so, I just lay down on the couch and cover myself in a blanket as she continues screaming. I try to leave again. So, she actually calls the cops, and then when I sit down hangs up on them. They of course think something is up, so, they show up, and she answers the door, blocks it and won't let me put until they tell her to. I spend about an hour sitting in the hallway, crying to the cop, who's honestly amazing. He just sits and listens and comforts me, without trying to slow my emotions. Following days, I just lock myself in the room, and she does everything to try and get to me, turning all the lights on at night, bringing dudes on dates at the restaurant, right next to our apartment, and stopping under our window, to talk, flirt, and laugh. Soul-crushing stuff, you know. Then a few nights later, she hits me in the face with a water bottle, and smashed my Xbox. Few days after that, she takes my social security card, birth certificate, and a lot of military documents. Threatens to destroy them, and won't return them, until the police get involved. Later that night, I'm shitting, she forces herself in the bathroom and tells me to get out, so she can use it. I tell her to use our second one, and she says, no. She starts recording me on the toilet and then advances until inches away and points the phone camera at Mighty. I grab it, because I figure her plan is, to try and blackmail or show people to make fun of me or something. She punches me in the temple 3 to 5 times, threatens to stab me with her keys, and jabs them at my face. I get up, and try to get away. She tries to corner me, and I run around her. She grabs me and we both fall to the floor. I fetal position as she rains down blows. I get up and run out the door and down the stairs and she grabs the back of my shirt, I fall down with my legs at the top of the stairs, and she digs her nails into them. Will most likely have scars for life, to be honest. Run out the apartment door and she runs out chasing me, until she sees several people already standing out there because they heard the commotion. And tries to immediately flip the script saying I attacked her, but thankfully they can back me up. I ask the neighbors to call the police and move out that night. Keep in mind that I'm 6 feet 5 inches 240 pounds lean. I've boxed before and got into a lot of fights. I know how to defend myself, and any moment I could have hurt her enough to stop her, but I just couldn't mentally force myself to put my hands on her after the abuse I endured as a kid. If that makes any sense. She continually harnesses me over text, and at a certain point I start ignoring her. I need to get out, so I DD my friends on the weekends while they drink. She starts showing up at the bars I'm at every single time and screams at me and tries to shove me until the bouncers have had to remove her multiple times. So I stop going out. Now she has no other ways to get at me, so she makes legal accusations, and I'm in the process of fighting those now, but thankfully I have video proof and a good lawyer backing me up, as well as multiple eyewitnesses. She also stole all my tax money and the assets we agreed I would take in the divorce. Got a therapist who ended up just constantly venting about her daughter and ex-husband, LOL. But I'm free now though, and I've never been happier. I moved to Hawaii, made lots of new friends, learning lots of new skills and trying lots of new hobbies. Been working out in these past 2 months after I've gotten away from my ex. Have been a revelation of how dark my life was living with her. I haven't had this much energy in years. I'm taking time to heal, so have politely declined them, but I've gotten a ton of attention from girls recently. Life can be rough, but to be honest, it's short. I refuse to spend any more of my time in misery. I will enjoy myself, I deserve it. These 2 months have been amazing and ain't shit gonna fit in my way. If anyone stuck through this whole book I just wrote, I apologize for how long it went on. It's just been helping to vent a little. I could write a book, so I'ma just go with one of the worst things. Me and my brother lived with our parents at the time. They were abusive as it was, towards us and each other. She was pregnant, and one day, they were just arguing, and the next thing I know, he choke-slammed her on the ground, and was strangling her. We freaked the F out. I was maybe 10. We luckily lived right next door to a family member's house, and went there, and got them, and they separated them. Can't remember a whole lot. They both ended up in jail for a bit. Don't remember them getting arrested. After getting my family members next door, the next thing I remember was my grandma picking us up. And like I said, she was pregnant. My brother was born, but died from lack of oxygen, I think it was, which I don't even want to get into. How I found out about that, I'm already crying. I have a memorial tattoo for him now. In September of last year, my now ex-boyfriend of 9 months, but we had been friends for over 15 years, ran me over with his truck. It was an F-150. I rolled under the truck twice, then a tire went over my chest. I remember everything, every single thing. Every break, crack, noises my body was making, etc. I got up, and was scalped, touched my skull. Do not recommend, by the way. All my ribs were crushed. I was dying. It was 3:30 in the morning. I had to walk around, holding my scalp on my head, to find my phone. I called my sister, told her I was dying, and that I had already called 911. I had not, but I wanted her to get my child, and hers, who were asleep inside before I died, and they found me in my driveway, the next morning. Called 911. Passed out in the ambulance, begging them not to let me die because I have a, then 6-year-old, daughter. Woke up couple weeks later. Paralyzed. Apparently, I fought tubes and all, yanked so many out, they had to paralyze me. They had to prone me, keep flipping me over and over every 8 hours, apparently, to get my lungs to work. Called the fam in, when I sided when they were plated my ribs, but got me back. Called them in 2 more times, to pull the vent plug. But fam didn't and wouldn't. I'm here and alive. After 37-ish broken bones, all my ribs but 13 in my back, broken hip, shoulder blade, jaw, etc., shredded lungs and diaphragm. I was so confused and scared when I woke up. Reality and dream state were so mixed. I could hear people talking, I just couldn't move. It was rough, to say the least. Had to learn to walk, talk, eat, drink, and wipe my ass, all over again. You would think that was the worst part. The worst part is the fallout afterwards. Lost custody, my home, my income, other than the little disability I get, and like I'm slowly losing my soul, little by little. I hope to be able to work next year. I have a great family and loved ones. but this has been the most effed up I've ever been mentally, and clearly physically. Court in 3 days, for the guy that did it. Might get a couple of years, it was intentional, I have it on my security cameras, but he was under influence, and had mental health issues. Apologies if I don't make much sense, because I started rambling. Thanks for listening.